Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to create this scroll-activated Rive animation. Now, what's happening here is you have these three circles in the middle, and there are three different timelines or animations that loop that we've defined in Rive. Now, what's really cool is with the help of JavaScript, we can instruct Rive which animation or timeline to play based on where we're at in the scroll position. Now, while this demo may not be the most impressive thing you've ever seen with these three circles, take a look at these examples. Just imagine being able to transition between these cool animation states based on scroll. So that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to create today. Definitely check out my upcoming Rive course. There's a link here. You can enter your email to be notified when that releases. And also check out the UI UX design course as well at DesignCourse.com. Let's get started. All right, so the first step is to create a new document here in Rive, 728 by 436, hit create artboard. We're gonna make this artboard background white for now because that's the starting color of our first panel in the web design, but we will be making this transparent before we export it though. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and create an ellipse or hit O on your keyboard. So I'll just hold Shift to drag out a perfect circle. And to get it lined up in the center, you could just use your live guides or these options up here as well. So essentially, we're going to go ahead and hide the fill. And I'm going to give this a stroke. And right now, the stroke color we want to be black. And then we're also going to modify the stroke option to dash right here. And I think we're going to specify like 19 and 8. Yeah, right around there is fine. No big deal. This up here, we could make this a little bit better, but I'm not too worried just for this quick demo. And so this is going to be our main ellipse in the middle. I'm going to copy this, hold Shift, scale it down, and then we'll go ahead and hold Shift and Alt to replicate it, and we'll position it right around there, and that's fine. Okay. So now we have our ellipses. So we'll just call this one middle. We'll call this one left. Just double click to change the name. And then this one right. Awesome. So now with this, we can go ahead and switch to the Animate tab. And for our Animate tab, we're going to have three different timelines, one for each section of the web page essentially. And these timelines, if we click on timeline 1, we also want to go ahead and change the name because the name of these timelines will be important in order for us to bind it in JavaScript. So the first one will name scroll_section_1. And then when we build out the animation for this one, we'll simply duplicate this and change the other sections to scroll section 2 and 3, respectively. Now, we could start animating however we want our elements to animate, right? There's a lot of different ways to tackle this. So for me, just for a quick demo, I'm just going to animate right now a rotation. We're just going to make these rotate in different directions. So to do that, we also have to understand that if we want to make adjustments like to the scale and the position of these elements in the other artboards, which would be kind of a cool way just to demonstrate, you know, animation abilities here in Rive, then we want to make sure that we set keyframes for those properties, even though in this particular timeline, we're not adjusting those properties. We still have to specify keyframes for those. So even though I'm not going to change the physical position in this timeline of scroll section 1, I am going to go up here in position for X and Y, right up there, and put keyframes right there at the very beginning. Okay. It's also important to do it scale if we plan on changing the scale, and then of course rotation as well. So we have all of these right now, and we're going to have to do this for all of these elements as well. So if I take just hold Shift, we can select both of these and then just put in our keyframes as well. So now they all have three or different keyframes, and so now what we could do is just copy this, go all the way out to the end, and paste those. Now the only thing we're going to change is just the rotation value. So like the middle one, we come down here and we can go ahead and change the rotation to 360 degrees. Now this one, we'll change that rotation to maybe -360. And then this one, we'll change that to -360 as well. Okay, so now if we hit the space bar and we go back to the beginning, we'll see it goes really fast. So to change the speed, we could change playback speed from 1x to, let's say, 0.2. So now they're a little bit more manageable. Okay, so now that we have those keyframes ready to rock and this timeline ready to go, we can go ahead, right-click, and duplicate it. So now we have scroll section 1, 2. Let's change that to 2. There we go. So now it's just a matter of, okay, how do you want your animation to respawn in this particular frame? Well, I'm going to scale this sucker down. And so up here, make sure for scale, you see this little link? Just make sure that's clicked so that they're both bound to each other. And if we change this scale, and we could literally just left click and drag down, we can make this small, like 53%. And I'm going to keep it at 53% as well up here at the very end keyframe. So let's change that to 53. And there we go. So now you'll see that's how those are working. Okay. Not the most exciting thing you've ever seen. Perhaps we can also maybe move this. I'll move this over here. All right. And then we'll take note of that position change, 220.5. Put that back up here. And then maybe we'll do the same thing here. So we'll push this here. And we'll say that is 506.5. And keyframe. Okay, that's cool. And then one more time, right-click, duplicate. Change this by double-clicking. And we'll change this to scroll section 3. And then at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and do something unique. You understand the process by now, and I'll just time-lapse this part. Awesome. Okay, so now if I play through this, this is our scroll section 3, what I decided to do. This is our scroll section 2, and then here's scroll section 1. Now it's time to go ahead and modify the state machine. And I'm going to call the state machine, we're going to rename this to scroll controller. There we go. And now we want to specify based on when this Rive file loads, thus the entry point right here reference, we want that to go to scroll section 1. If you wanted to go to a different one, you can just drag over the other timeline and sever that connection and push it there instead, but no big deal. This will work. And let's increase this so I can see it a little bit better. And so now what we want to do is on the scroll controller, we want to have an input of type trigger and 3 of them. And they're going to be named the same exact name right here. So scroll section 1 for the trigger. All right, and then we're going to do another one. This will be scroll section 2, and then another one, scroll section 3. And really, these are just triggers. There's no values to put them, and it's just a way for us to communicate via JavaScript which timeline that we want to play based on the scroll position. All right. So after that, now we take any state, all right? And our any state is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's like any state, if you want to have a transition between scroll section 1, 2, and 3, then we want to connect it to scroll section 1, 2, and 3 for any state. And in order to do this, we want to first go ahead and select on this element right here, this icon, this little arrow. And we want to specify condition 1, or scroll section 1 rather, right there. And then a duration, we could specify how long it's a transition and animate those various keyframes that we adjusted between those two states. So I'll put 200 milliseconds. And you can also add interpolation if you want between that animation. All right, and then we do the same thing for scroll section 2 and scroll section 3. So now we just drag in a connection here, a connection there, and then we select on that. We change this to scroll section 2, and again, 200 milliseconds if you want to keep things consistent. And then same thing down here, 200 milliseconds, and add scroll section 3. Okay, so what's cool is once we hit play, you can see it's playing scroll section 1. Now, it's going to stop here because I have not changed each of the scroll sections from one shot to a loop, which is what we want. So let's change all 3 of those to a loop. There we go. Let's go back to scroll section state machine and hit play. And now these will keep on rotating indefinitely. Now, it'll happen until, though, we click and activate one of these triggers. So let's try scroll trigger 2. Ah, look at that. How about scroll section 3 trigger? There we go. And we can go back and forth between any of these in any different iterations. So this is a very simple demo just because, we want to work through this quick, but you can do some really super cool stuff like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but stuff way more cool than this. But now you understand the structure of it within Rive. But obviously that's only a part of the problem. We also have to get this all tied up and working and integrated into a project with HTML. But before we do that, let's go ahead back to design, and we're going to go ahead and just hide this right here. Before I forget, just to show you, you can also animate the color properties. So if the first one is going to be on a white background, like the first section, it makes sense to have these black or some other color that you can see. But the next section is going to be almost black or black itself. So we won't be able to see these unless we change them to white in the second scroll section. So what that means is all 3 of the scroll sections need to have a color keyframe at the beginning and the end for all 3 of these. So if I select all 3, we'll see we have we see the fill right here. So all we have to do is, or the stroke rather, we could change the stroke color right here and apply a keyframe for this value. So this is going to be a keyframe, and this is going to be a keyframe. Alrighty. Then we're going to go to section 2, and this is going to be its own keyframe as well, except it's going to be white. So let's make sure we go at the beginning. We're going to specify white. There we go. And then as well, go to the end. This is white as well. And then scroll section 3, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make these white. Oops. You want to make sure, though, before you do that, you get to the very beginning. Select all 3. Oops, didn't mean to do that. There we go. There we go. This is going to be white. And that will be white as well. Okay, so 2 and 3 have white elements, and then section 1 has the dark one. Okay, one final thing, we switch back to the design tab, and we're going to go ahead and just put 0% for the background. So now we click export, and there we go. It's only literally 1.89 kilobytes. Very awesome, very low file size for what we're doing. And now let's go ahead and switch gears to the front-end development portion. Okay, so now I'm in Visual Studio Code with an empty folder that is open. And we're going to go ahead and add an index.html. Of course, I'm not going to specify or use React or anything. We're going to keep this vanilla JavaScript. That way, we're kind of framework agnostic here. So just so you can understand the basic concepts, at least in a vanilla sense. So exclamation point enter. We will link a CSS /main.css file. So we're going to create that file, a folder first called CSS, and then a main.css. Okay, now inside of here, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to real quickly just put in some quick HTML. And the HTML required for this, you're looking at it. It's very simple. So we simply have a div class of gap and gap1. And then we have an element that says an H2 that says sick in there. Next up is a div class container. This is where we're going to put our canvas ID. So we're going to have a title here. We're going to have an H1 here. And then we have the all-important div class container. This will be position fixed so that the canvas element or a Rive graphic is always present on screen. And then inside we have our canvas ID, Rive canvas. That's very important. That's how we reference it in JavaScript. And then we have the width and height that we specified in Rive itself, 728 by 436. And then, of course, at the bottom, we have a div class of gap and gap2. And they're just empty, pretty much for the most part, just to give us the ability to scroll, to show off the effect. Now, the next part is we're going to import two different scripts, JavaScript, through CDNs. The first one's going to be Rive itself. And whenever I do scroll activated type of animations like this, I like to use Linus, a smooth scroll library. It kind of just makes the effect that much cooler. And then finally, our inline JavaScript will be right down here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to wrap everything in a class called scroll animation controller, just like this. All right, and then we'll execute scroll animation controller outside of that here in a bit. So I'm just going to copy and paste a few different elements, and we'll quickly try to describe what is happening here. And I know it looks kind of, scary, especially if you're not, well versed in JavaScript. I definitely take a look at any type of JavaScript introduction course before trying to go down this route. Now, of course, you can use ChatGPT or Claude or Cursor to try to help you come up with this stuff as well. It's all up to you. But essentially, we have a constructor here where we pass in the canvas ID, which will be Rive canvas, and we have the Rive path. And the Rive path is simply just going to be the URL. So when we call scroll animation controller, we'll pass in these two elements. This will be the URL of the Rive file that we downloaded, and we're just going to place that right here in the root of the project folder. All right, so then this element is very important. Notice how we have scroll section 1, 2, and 3, and then we have our properties, and min means the actual percentage height of the viewport that you're scrolling in. So 0 would mean at the top, the very top of the page where you haven't scrolled at all, to about 29%. And that gives us to the first third of the page. And so what it's going to do is it's going to call scroll section 1 if this meets the requirement that we're high up on the viewport. And then scroll section 2, same concept, and then scroll section 3. Now, initially, this is where we call Rive, and we initialize it. We pass in the canvas. This is all basic stuff with Rive. It needs all this. Autoplay true. State machines, scroll controller. That's why we named it that specifically. All right. After that, we call a couple other functions here. We have one called init, and then another one, which happens to be right there. I pasted in a wrong location. Let's back up real quick. All right. This has to be called outside of the constructor. Sorry about that. All right. So I pasted in two different things here. And by the way, you can get access to the code. Check out the description. So here's the init function. And then here is the handle scroll function. And so I'm just going to, there we go. So this state machine, this Rive state machine inputs scroll controller. So we need to get the state machine itself. And then we're going to add a scroll listener. All right, this is vanilla JavaScript, add event listener. You can do clicks, you can do all that type of stuff. And we're going to call this.handle scroll, which is defined beneath. Underneath here, this is all just stuff that will, right here, get the current scroll percentage right here based on the document and height, window inner height, and then finally determine which animation that we should play right in this for if statement. All right, so this is basically going to call upon these elements up here, scroll section 1, 2, or 3, and then pass that in for the animation name, the timeline name. All right, and then finally, one more after here, and it's going to be play animation. All right, so we're going to iterate over the animation names, which are defined again up here, 1, 2, and 3. All right, and then based on the match right here, it's going to fire this input, essentially. Now, outside of all this, this is where we actually use it. And to use it, we can just call or define a constant of controller. Scroll animation controller is Rive canvas. Again, that's in reference to the ID in the HTML all the way up here. Then we have test.rive, or whatever you want to name it. So I'm going to go ahead and real quickly get that file. We're going to rename it to test.rive or Rive. All right. And then that's basically it. But we do have the real quick boilerplate for the smooth scroll library, which is separate from all the stuff up there. But that's what we're going to use. Let's just delete that stuff. There we go. And then save it. Now the last thing is going to be our main.css file. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste a bunch of rule sets, and you can look through this as your own. This isn't a CSS tutorial. But you can see where you're just defining some basic properties with our gap properties. One thing that's going to be important is this element, the container, actually no, the canvas container right here. The canvas container, we have at position fixed. That's what keeps it always present despite our scroll location. And this is centering it right here. Z-index is making sure it shows up behind the area that we have in text. Padding, all this other stuff. Display grid, place content center is just to center up that Rive file so that it stays in the center. Now let's go ahead, right click, open with Live Server if you have the Live Server extension. If you don't, you can install it over here. And there we go. So we have our first one. Notice the smooth scroll. And of course, you can adjust properties for that. Ah, look at that. So basically, it's going from scroll section 1 timeline right here once it satisfies that requirement of, you know, following within like from 29% to like 65% or whatever it is. It's going to play this state, which is the second scroll section. Then down here, it changes to the third one. And of course, this is a very simple demo, but you can do a lot more very cool things, a lot more cooler things than what I'm doing here. But this is the general concept with this approach for handling scroll animations. All right, everybody, hopefully you enjoyed that. Once again, check out the upcoming Rive course in the YouTube description here. Enter your email on the landing page. You'll get notified when that releases. And as always, definitely check out UI UX Design Course at designcourse.com, along with other courses that I've produced as well. See you soon.